I've been very impressed with him. And so have a couple other brothers who've had a chance to meet him. And he's going to be here just for a short time. And while he's here, I wanted to give him an opportunity to come and bring some of the unique information that he have discussed with us over the last few days. And without further ado, I bring to you and present to you the noble Kabir Uriel Bey. Let's greet this brother with a hearty hand clap and a hearty Islam.
Islam. Islam. First, I'd like to give all praises to Allah, great God of the universe. I give honor to the Prophet Noble Uriel, to the forerunner, Marcus Garvey, and I give honor to everything that pertains to Islam. I give honor to our national flag, seal, national seal that is, and Constitution. And I give respect to the banner as well.
That's right. What it is.
However, the reason, or one of the reasons as to why I'm here today is to share some truths with you about the banner, the national flag, your nationality, often referred to as totum populi corpus in Latin, which is your national language. Because when the Prophet brought back your nationality, your vast estate, he also brought back your language, of which we have been, how can I say, we've been led to believe that the Latin language is European, or it was, created by them and is therefore theirs. However, that is not the case. But first things first, I'd like to have us get an understanding about our national flag, about what it is and its importance. Now, you see here we have the red flag with the five-pointed green star in the center, and we have the banner next to it, right? But now let's ask ourselves a question. Are we citizens? And what kind of citizens are we? And how does that correlate with this flag and this banner? Or what are the correlations? First, we know that we are Moorish Americans. We're Moors, or we proclaimed ourselves to be Moors. Great. That's beautiful. And some of us now make the claim that we're citizens. But now the question is, what kind of citizen are you? Now, when the Prophet came on the scene and did what he did, he said, I've come to put you back into the constitutional fold. Right? So that you can take your place in the affairs of men. Now, if we have something known as the United States Constitution, right? And if we say we are citizens, and our national name being Moorish American, our titles being Il and Bey, well then again, the question is, what type of citizen are you? Well, I'd like to say, for the record, that I do hereby declare that I am a United States citizen. That's right. Now, I know a lot of you have been learning a lot about this Johnny Liberty stuff, patriot information, and about different things about the law, so forth and so on. But don't get it confused, because a lot of that information, as some of you well know, has nothing to do with us. The The reason why I say I'm a United States citizen is because if I know that my Moorish foremothers and forefathers established, ordained and established that Constitution so that the European might have a right to function, right, for his social, political, and economic freedom, of which, yes, we know he breached the agreement and forfeited everything, but it says in the preamble, or exordium, which that preamble says, or starts off with, we the people of the United States, right? So we understand that one nation, namely the Moorish nation, ordained and established a constitution for the European colonial settler, of which he is. It says, do ordain, I'm fast forwarding a little, do ordain and establish this constitution for the United States of America, right? So again, that means one nation establishing a constitution for another said nation. Notice why and how I said. Because the United States of America was never a nation, nor can it ever be a nation. It is a corporation and only a corporation because the banner, which you see here, was for, again, as I said, their social, political, and economic freedom. That's all, and for trade, or commercia, commerce. All right? So, as I said, I do hereby declare that I am a United States citizen. And I pledge my allegiance to the national flag, United States flag, seal, Great Seal, and Constitution. All right? So, I just want to make sure that we have an understanding about that. So, to take it a step further, we need to get an understanding now as to where and how the Constitution applies. Many of us have been led to believe that, well, you know, the Constitution doesn't matter anymore because they pretty much ignore it. And many of us have found this to be the case when we find ourselves in court, all right? Whenever any kind of action is brought against us, whether it's civil or criminal, and you make mention of the Constitution, many times you'll even hear the magistrate, not judge because there are no judges save for the people, you'll hear the magistrate say, well, if you mention that Constitution one more time, I'm going to hold you in contempt. Well, even though it may appear as though they have, in a sense, obfuscated their constitutional obligation, well, let it be known for the record that I'm here as the people of the United States to enforce the law, as only the people can. But you must know, first and foremost, that you are the people, right? And the oath to which they took is, as we say, hear ye, all you constitutional servants of, by, and for the people. Right? Namely, the people of the United States have taken an oath. An oath is an imprecation. An imprecation is also known as what? A curse. Meaning that if you violate this oath, as we know they have, that means that justice must now catch you. Right? And is not justice one of our 5 principles? Right? So when love, truth, peace, and freedom are violated, then justice must surely take its course. So, it is therefore due to the criminal violations that we, the people, under the principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, do now, with regards to the unrelenting treason, unconstitutional perfidy, which is another word for treason, and misrepresentation, and I can think of a lot of other words, do now breathe into legal and lawful existence as only the divine, noble, highborn, birthright, bloodline, Moorish nobility, or the heirs of the Moorish nobility, namely us, breathe into legal, lawful existence the only divine rule of law to let you know, in no uncertain terms, again, that justice will catch you. Now, I say this, and a lot of us may say, well, okay, fine. This guy or this fellow has no conscience, and you can tell him this, that, and the other. You can think that, you can get him told or whatever, but he's not going to listen. But I beg to differ. And the reason why I say that is because if you are who you say you are, and you are a manifestation of truth, and you stand on a firm foundation of truth, and you are the divine lawgivers and lawmakers, Muslim noble mothers and sons, genatrix, which is another term for mother, sons, farias, well then I say, execute the law. Let it be known, openly and notoriously, in all arenas, whether it be international, national, federal, state, local, wherever. All right? And one of the reasons why that hasn't been done as of this time, for the most part, is that many of us have been, again, running around chasing other individuals who don't even really know themselves. And when I refer to these so-called patriots, etc. But let it be known that I and those like me are the only true patriots. Because patriot only means bonus civis, which means good citizen. And we are the only true citizens here that outrank any other in society. Right? So even though initially, when the Constitution was ordained and established, and we upgraded this guy's status to a citizen of sorts, he still was not a citizen who had all of the protections, immunities at law that you have. To a degree he did, but again, when he breached and violated that contract, or that charter, constitutional charter, well again, all of that was forfeited, went out the window. This takes us into the area of the bankruptcy. Now, many of you heard things about the bankruptcy. I'm sure individuals have touched on it. However, very few have been able to substantiate any of what they say. And you know that when you deal with this guy, you can't come to him with halfway information. You can't say, well, I'm not a part of the bankruptcy and this, that, and the other, or the bankruptcies of 1930 and 33 or 30 through 38. That's all fine, well, and good, but you got to come with some hard, concrete evidence. Now, we know that when he filed for this corporate bankruptcy in favor of his principals, namely the international bankers, that meant that everything that he was doing at that point had to be changed. Or at least so they felt it had to be changed. Or the dictum was that it had to be changed. So all procedures of law were changed. Everything was blended into what they call one form of action, or one form of pleading. All right? And this one form of pleading blended all of the so-called jurisdictional procedures together. Right? Many of you have heard about the common law jurisdiction. You've heard about equity and international admiralty maritime, right, which is supposedly the law of the sea, which has been brought further inland. However, I'm not here to get into arguments, if you will, about the different jurisdictions, this, that, and the other, because I'm not trying to fall into this guy's trap. However, I know that whatever procedure it is he says that he's functioning under is under a colorable jurisdiction at best and an unconstitutional one, right? So now when they talk about, well, okay, fine, he filed for bankruptcy and the procedure of law was changed and therefore the Constitution was suspended. Well, again, I beg to differ. It only appeared to be suspended mainly, primarily because we, the people, were asleep. Right? So, I really can't blame him for doing what he did. All right? However, to give you some evidentiary documentation, or where you yourself can do some research and check it out, because as many say, or as some say, I don't want you to believe any of what it is I'm telling you. I want you to check it out for yourself so you can see. Well, we know that in 1933, under the so-called New Deal democracy, or the beginning of the New Deal democracy, when President Roosevelt took office, said president, that is, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the bankruptcy was declared or expressed in executive orders. Those executive orders are 6073, 6102, 6111, and 6260. Sure. Those executive orders are 6073, 6102, 6111, and 6260, which was confirmed by Congress, or said Congress, because I'm consenting to nothing. So you'll notice everything that I say is much like the prophet expressed in our divine constitution and bylaws, this said government. When he said, obey the laws of this said government, prophet knew what he was doing. The reason being is because when he said, obey the laws of this said government, and when the prophet was on the scene at that time, he was talking about constitutional law. He wasn't talking about bombarded rules and regulations, all right, which are decrees of council, which are forced or unlawfully and illegally forced upon the people against their will and without their lawful consent. So, again, back to this proof or evidentiary documentation. As I said, Congress confirmed this bankruptcy under the House of Joint Resolutions, June 5th, 1933. 73rd Congress, first session. All right? And the purpose of confirming this bankruptcy was to repudiate or to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, right? And to impair the obligations and considerations of their constitutional obligation or oath, or iuris siurandi, which is another term for oath. Now, again, I use these Latin terms, as I mentioned earlier, because it's important to know your language. And in understanding language, generally, more specifically your language, there are a lot of things that will be opened up to you. A lot of doors will be opened. So, getting back to the documents, if you will. So after the House of Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress, first session, you also have something known as the Senate Report number 93-549. This came along much later in 1973. But of course, it talked about this bankruptcy and all of these specifics. Now, in Senate Report number 93-549, you'll find a lot of information, documentation about the executive orders for the so-called existing national emergency, of which, for the record, there are at least 4 existing emergencies. All right, starting, as I said, with 1933, fast-forwarding to December 16th, 1950, under the Truman administration, which was a national emergency, of which was declared by proclamation, a presidential proclamation. And I'm going to focus a little on the proclamations in a second, and tell you why they are so important here in terms of this fraud being perpetrated and perpetuated here in the continental United States. But as I was saying, the Senate Report number 93-549 goes into these particular or specific proclamations. As I said, December 16th, 1950. Also, it goes on to talk about the national emergencies of which were declared by President Nixon during the Nixon administration. March 28th, 1970, Nixon declared a national emergency due to the postal workers' strike because they were striking against, if you will, the said federal government or the federal corporate government because of the inflation on the paper bills of credit, what many of you refer to as money, yes. But these paper bills of credit, what some of you may even also say FRNs, Federal Reserve Notes, which cannot be notes, because a note, as the brother mentioned earlier, we're talking about promissory notes, and a promissory note is to promise that someone is going to pay you something. But on these particular bills of credit, there is no promise. It just says for all private and public debts, right? That's it. So they're not promising you anything. And the only promise that they made, which was an unconstitutional promise, were to the bankers, the international bankers. That's all. However, the purpose as to why we're here and as to why we're enforcing the law is so that we will let the said European slave colonial settler, because yes, he is still a slave. How do I know this? When he forfeited that constitutional contract, his oath, and that charter, that means he went back into perpetual slavery. That's right, here in the United States. So you have a slave sitting in your palace, in the White House. You have slaves, I'm not even just talking about Negroes, I'm talking about the European, yes, sitting in Congress, or said Congress. So now, if you are supposed to be a citizen, a United States citizen, a Moorish American, within a constitutional fold, now the question is, what are you going to do? And the reason why I'm giving you this documentary evidence is so that you can use it to your benefit and to the benefit of the Moorish nation. Right? Because what does the prophet say? It says it takes finance to build a nation. Now when I say finance, I'm talking about the only pecuniary medium of exchange in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. Gold and silver, and anything to the contrary is notwithstanding. Right. And as per Article 6 of that same Constitution, he has a fiduciary obligation to uphold that. And the simple fact that he is not functioning with that says that his time is up and he's got to go. Now, I'm not saying this in hate, I'm saying this in love. Prophet said it himself, said the guy has to go back to Europe from whence he came. So, back to the bankruptcy. Of course, this is all dealing with the bankruptcy, directly and indirectly. But you can also look in something known as Public Law 94-564. In Public Law 94-564. Public Law 94-564, which you can also find some information on that in the same Senate Report number 93-549, but Public Law 94-564 is a document unto itself. And that document speaks of the said Secretary of the Treasury, the United States Treasury, who took on another capacity. He was functioning now in a de facto capacity, contrary to his constitutional capacity. And this de facto capacity, corporate, criminal capacity, as I would call it, for the federal corporate United States, for the sole purpose of administering and administrating public policy, all right? Public policy only means a corporate policy for the corporate federal government, the corporate states, the county, etc., for the Union State Society, namely U.S. That is why I am not a U.S. citizen, nor do I care to be, nor will I ever be, now that I know who I am and who my foremothers and forefathers are, and who the prophet is. Because make no mistake, the prophet is doing a great deal of work on the soul plane. But getting back to Public Law 94-564, you will find information on the December 16, 1950 national emergency, which was declared by President Truman because of the Korean War, that the Secretary of the Treasury would now become the receiver in bankruptcy. So now if you are a receiver, again, reorganizing, so when they talk about reconstruction, well, there have been many reconstruction periods, not just during slavery, but many. And the reconstruction period of 1950, which was only to, perpetuate the bankruptcy, because this was the second bankruptcy in which they filed for, because they came out of World War II in worse shape than they were in prior to going in. All right? This was one of the reasons why the League of Nations was instituted under what they call the, if you look under Title 22 of the United States Code Annotated, Section 287, you will see information on how and why the United Nations was created. It was created for the sole purpose of being a law merchant entity to carry out the corporate public policy of the federal corporate United States, and more specifically, the public policy of the international bankers. Now, I know this is probably a lot of information, and I hope I'm not going too fast. If I am at any point in time, please, raise your hand or give a nod or something, and I will slow down. All right? Yes?
Along the lines of what you're speaking, I couldn't find any turmoil when they filed bankruptcy, when they came out with the Federal Reserve note. I'm saying, how did the people, who I thought the people were, how did the government do this to them without something documenting that there was no riot?
Yeah.
Now you just answered my question. We're the people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good. So, many of us don't realize, that the brother just mentioned that, don't realize how much weight that carries. So when you, those of you who have been around in the 60s and have heard many speeches where people talk about power to the people, those individuals don't even know what they're talking about. All right? But when I say we the people, what do I mean? People means citizen, and citizen means people, which therefore means you are a member of society. And when I say society, I mean societas, which is another term for, get this, confederation. All right? So now, many of us were under the impression that, once the Constitution came along, the Federation went to the wayside, or the Confederation rather, went to the wayside, and that was it. It was over and done with. But make no mistake, in Article 6, it talks about how, though, the European being under oath and obligation, a constitutional oath and obligation is to uphold this Constitution as well as all of the previous treaties, obligations under the Confederation. All right? So again, the Confederation is still alive and kicking. But not getting away again from Public Law 94-564, and I'm spending a lot of time on that. The reason being is because a lot of things were done under that particular so-called public law. All right? Yes?
Okay. And then the information you change, I mean, the information given about that 564. I mean, if we research them, will it be in a law library or will it be in, is it possible for us to go to like a main library or a law library to get that information?
Yeah, if you cannot find it on the internet, because some of the documents may not be on the internet, because of them being as old as they are, and then some of them may not be on the internet for obvious reasons, because the internet, for the most part, supplies general information. But you shouldn't really have any problems finding it in any library, public library or law library, etc. I know this to be true because I found the documents there. The executive orders, public law, as I said, 94-564, the House Joint Resolution 192. And you also must understand that this is how the Social Security Administration came into being. The Social Security Administration was one of many socialist committees, communist organizations that was formed purportedly to deal with the said national emergency or economic emergency. Couldn't be a national emergency because, again, as we said, America was never a nation. Right? And when they, by proclamation, each president or said president, Roosevelt, Truman, Nixon, when they made these proclamations and executive orders, etc., which brought about, how can I say, some 470 provisions of so-called federal law and statutes that gave unbridled power to the president, unconstitutional. Because before I even go any further, let it be known, a lot of us were running around talking about federal this, federal that, and we're the federal government, and blah, blah, blah. No. There is absolutely nothing in the Constitution that says federal. The word is not in there. You can look at it or look for it anagrammatically speaking. If you want to look at it like a lexigram, backwards, up, down, sideways, in or out, there is no federal anything in the Constitution. All right?
Federation?
I'm sorry?
The word federation?
No. Confederation has nothing to do with federal. All right? So we have a bunch of individuals who have basically assumed an authority only, again, because we haven't said anything. Yes? Islam.
What was the prophet alluding to when he said that I made you a nation within a nation?
Okay.
Islam.
Question, what was the prophet alluding to when he said that I made you all a nation within a nation?
Well, we have to understand that, again, when the prophet said, I made you a nation within a nation, you have to understand where we were at that time, where our mindset was, right? And our understanding of things, of which is a lot clearer now than it was during 1928. The prophet, of course, being several years or eons or light years ahead of us, and of course, he had to be. But, I mean, for example, when he said, these lessons and instructions are for all those who love Jesus. Well, many of us were Christians at that time. I mean, matter of fact, Islam prior to the prophet wasn't even mentioned in North America or the Northern Hemisphere. It was a crime to say Islam anything. everybody jumped on the bandwagon after the prophet came and did what he did. So I'm saying that to say that the term nation within a nation, which was no question, no doubt of contradiction that you are a nation, always was and will be. But for all intent and purpose, this guy in the government, etc., was referred to as a nation. But this is why the prophet went on to say, said government. Okay? I hope I answered your question. Okay. Were there any more questions before I go any further? Okay, good. Well, anyway, and the reason why I say, talking about these proclamations. The proclamations, as a matter of fact, a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, and it may sound also like I'm jumping around the place, but you'll see the thread. A lot of you have heard about, the right to travel and driving without a license and stuff like that, of which is a constitutional liberty, right? Of which cannot be deprived, or the citizen cannot be deprived without due process of law, as pursuant to but not limited to the Fifth Amendment. Okay? Notice I said as pursuant to but not limited to. Okay? But, be that as it may, the right to travel, yes, is one that, and the reason why I'm focusing on this is because many of us only see it within the confines of, okay, I'm getting in my car and I'm going from point A to point B, and I don't want the police to bother me, this, that, and the other. But when I say right to travel, I mean throughout the world. Okay? And I mean unobstructed travel. Wherein no said government of any said nation who flies nothing but corporate banners, all right, will tell me or anyone like me that I cannot cross any of their imaginary borderlines. All right? And so when I focus on this right to travel thing, and the reason why I say this is because a lot of us who have done some research on the right to travel will find case law after case law after case law, and that's all fine, well, and good. But how many of us have gone into the case law to read it? Because when you read the case law, it brings about a new understanding of what right to travel, for example, or anything else, is about. All right? For example, now this whole issue of passports. I mean, what is this about? And if we are talking about passports, well, how can a settler who is functioning, as I said, unconstitutionally, fraudulently, under trickery, coercion, compulsion, conquest, and anything else you can think of, well, how can he issue me through the said Secretary of State, who by his or her discretion, be it Madeleine Albright, yes, or any of her successors, is going to tell me again that I can go here or there, or I cannot go here or there. All right? Or again, will issue me a passport. Now, if you notice in that passport, that so-called American passport, it says under nationality, United States of America. How can United States of America be a nationality? Unless, of course, it's implying that I am a corporate entity of some kind, of which I'm not. All right? And then again, as I said, anything that he issues is unlawful at best anyway. Why? Because I know of the fraud. Right? We can find proof of that in, now this is really good evidence, or documentary evidence, or proof. And that is on May 23rd, 1933, I'm not getting away from right to travel, this ties in. May 23rd, 1933, a congressman named Louis T. McFadden brought criminal charges, or an indictment, if you will, against the comptroller of the currency, the said Secretary of Treasury of the United States, as well as the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve Bank System. And in this, what is referred to as, I can't think of the name right now, but we'll just say it was an impeachment of sorts. And it unfortunately was referred to the Judiciary Committee and buried there, of which they're still waiting for it to be acted upon. And also, for the record, Louis T. McFadden he was poisoned and never to be heard from again. But be that as it may, he left some very good information, and which talks about the misappropriation of the United States gold, or the people's gold. My goal, your goal. All right? And how they did this was very interesting. I'll just touch on some things. For example, they made false claims against the United States Treasury. And what they did was that they they initially placed United States government credit in specific amounts to foreign governments, foreign central banks of issue, private interests, namely for the purposes of the international bankers. And in so doing, they also made unlawful contracts in the name of the United States government and in the name of the United States Treasury. All right? And also purchased United States government securities with this credit, of which the people never gave them any authority to do. All right? They have been, from day one, pretty much from the time that the Constitution was ordained and established, they have made all kinds of abridgments, usurpations, etc., for their own selfish gain, as we well know. However, he goes on to talk about how everything, all of your property, including your bodies, was pledged as collateral against the debt of the federal corporate United States. And of course, with the advent of the New Deal democracy and, under the Roosevelt administration and the public policy for the purposes of administrating the bankruptcy, they have devised many ways, of course, of getting you to comply or to deceive you into declaring yourself as a U.S. citizen or a citizen of the United States. And again, we know that the "of" is the preposition of which connects you to the corporation. However, I am a citizen, as I said, a United States citizen and a citizen in the United States. If you look at Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution, it talks about those citizens of the several states shall have the privileges and immunities of those citizens in the several states. And those citizens who were in the several states were us. All right? So, as I said, you can look that up at any time. The May 23rd, 1933 Articles of Impeachment, that's what it's called. All right? And Louis T. McFadden, of which I'm not surprised he did not implicate Congress for the simple reason that he, at that time, was a congressman. But Congress, of course, was as guilty as sin and as guilty as the rest of the bunch. All right? So, if there are any other questions before I go any further? Any questions at all? Yes?
I have a question about the United Nations.
Islam, brother. I had a question about the United Nations again. You said it was created for merchant services or something like that, international. Could you
Yes,
explain that?
law
One
merchant.
second.
Law merchant only means commercial law. And everything you know right now is functioning under commercial law or in commerce. All right? And everything that was pledged as collateral against the debt is assumed to be functioning and a part of commerce. Right? All of these set Bill of Rights, Amendments 1 or Articles 1 through 8, have been statutized in commerce. under the so-called statutory jurisdiction and procedures, of which there is no statutory jurisdiction and there is no statutory procedure. Why? Because the Constitution makes no mention of it. You see? But the Constitution does provide for the equity and the admiralty, but it is not the constitutional equity and admiralty. Okay? However, this is the law merchant. And just backtracking for a minute and also in answer to your question about the law merchant, when I mentioned early on one form of action or one form of pleading, that only means that they hodgepodged the law to blend everything together so that there would be no distinctions in or at law. And when I say at law, I mean constitutional law. All right? So now, just as in 1938, because you have to understand that when all of these other things were going on, the bankruptcy and when it was officially so-called declared, but of course not disclosed to the public at large or the people themselves, they had to have a case or a case law to legitimize the bankruptcy, right? So what they did is that they said we're going to have secret meetings, etc., to basically amend the judicial procedure so that we can function in favor of our creditors, namely the bankers. And this is why when you go into court, as I said earlier, every action that's being brought against you is a bankruptcy action, right? Under equity commercial law, with debtor-creditor law being the controlling law, right? So everything is based on the principle of someone being a debtor and someone being a creditor. However, the true or real creditor never makes an appearance. Why? Because you have these lawyers or fictions of law or waxworks or mannequins or speaking likenesses, right? Because if you look it up in the Black's Law Dictionary, you will see lawyer or attorney says representation of person. A representation of person only means fiction of law. All right? So now you have these waxworks who have, as I said, changed the law, blended the law. So, for example, in 1938, under the Erie versus Tompkins, or Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case, which was the case that changed the standing precedents of 150 years of constitutional law, or so-called common law. And at that point, that there was no more common law and constitutional law in the said federal government, this meant that Congress no longer had the power to declare substantive rules of common law applicable in a state, whether it was local or general, whether it was part of commercial law or part of the law of torts, didn't matter. It no longer existed as far as they were concerned. And these lawyers that got together, said attorneys, judges, and the like, who are all a part of the Bar Association, as many of you know, which is a franchise of the Lawyers Guild of Great Britain, okay? They decided that, well, we are going to blend everything under what many of you have come to know, the Uniform Commercial Code. I'm not going to spend too much time on the Uniform Commercial Code because that is inconsequential to us. Because when you walk around using codes, talking about this code, that code, the other code, whether it's the United States Code or whatever code, all right, it means nothing unless you go inside the code and you read the code to understand the language. Why? Because the language is representative of the constitutional law and representative of the said common law, for which he had an obligation to function and was bound by to function under. Yes? It's
So the only free speech is on the floor of Congress. Go following on what you're saying.
Okay. Well, no.
No.
No. No. It would appear to be the case by virtue of them functioning under the law merchant principle, but that is not the case. The only free speech is, how can I say, is, of which is enshrined in the Constitution, that makes mention of it in the First Amendment, is reserved to the people. That is all.
Turn the tables on again.
Here, is reserved to the people. People of the United States, that means you and me. All right? And just for the record, it is constitutional heresy. Okay, many of you have heard about heretics, but it is constitutional heresy to declare an unconstitutional act or a series of unconstitutional acts to be constitutional simply and only and solely because Congress deems it to be constitutional or deems an emergency to exist. There are no provisions in the Constitution that gives Congress any authority to do so. So this is why I say, and I reiterate, that you must be the ever-present vanguards of justice. Right? Islam. And so, that we know that they really, like I said, their power was, in every sense of the word, limited. But, as I said, they assert power. But again, there was no constitutional provision, no amendment, no anything to abolish, suspend, abrogate the Constitution in any sense of the word. All right? So even though there are a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of Moors, I've heard a lot of patriots, and everybody say, well, Constitution is suspended. No, it was never suspended. Did Congress ordain and establish the Constitution? No, the people did. Right? So as per, or as pursuant to the 9th Amendment, right? All rights reserved to the people, right? Those rights enumerated in the Constitution, right? Are you with me? Islam. Shall not be denied or disparaged. Okay, to paraphrase. So, Amendments 9 and 10 are expressly reserved to the people. Okay? The other thing about these proclamations, executive orders, national emergencies, all of these things that tie in, that fit in, and are integral parts of this bankruptcy, right? This global bankruptcy, as per the Depression, etc., and everything that ensued thereafter, only pertains to persons, individuals, corporations, partnerships, associations. So all of the restrictions laid thereupon had nothing to do with the people, and they knew it themselves, which is why it only specifies persons, of which I am not. All right? And this is why I say when you step into any of these so-called Union States courts, which are only the people's courts, but it appears to be a Union States court because you've got a European settler sitting up there in a black robe, right? Again, yes, perpetrating a fraud. So now, whenever you walk into that court, it becomes a constitutional court. I don't care how many admiralty flags they got up there. That means nothing to me. Your first obligation is to me and those like me, namely the Moorish nation, namely the people of the United States. All right? So, this is why the Moors, or the Moorish nation, have declared their independence. That's right. Did you know that? That as a nation, we have declared our independence. The document of which is recorded in the United Nations with the Secretary General. What's his name? Kofi Annan, yes. But, Kofi Annan. But be that as it may, again, we need no validation from any of them. Even though our national flag is flying down there on 45th Street, right, in Manhattan, what they call the Moroccan flag, which we know different. And we now know that it is not only the Moorish flag, we now know that it's the United States flag. All right? That's why I say I pledge my allegiance, right, to the United States flag. Why, how do I know that? Because, see now, a lot of Moors have come on the scene talking about the so-called continental United States flag with the cedar tree, you know, and the red flag with the green tree and all of that. This, and that's all fine, well and good, and that's nice. However, that has no saving power. Why? Because the Prophet didn't bring that. And for those of us that think we can get ahead of the Prophet, you are sadly mistaken. Just because you got a few facts and figures and, you know, think you're going to rock the house now, it ain't happening. All right? And the reason why I know this is the United States flag, apart from the Prophet bringing back our flag, or bringing it to us, is when declaring myself in any of these said Union States courts, or the People's Courts of the United States, and of all of the bolsterous words and things that these magistrates say or use or threats, etc., I have yet to see one refute or deny this flag. As a matter of fact, I know of instances where they have told the court officer, bailiff, etc., to remove that flag. And they weren't talking about this one. They were talking about the so-called continental United States flag and whatever else, all right? Or what is also referred to as vexillum. Vexillum. V-E-X-I-L-L-U-M is the Latin term for flag. V-E-X-I-L-L-U-M. Vexillum. The term is also, unfortunately, used for banner. All right? When you start to get into the science of flags. All right? But as I said, and I will reiterate this every so often, that our status, well, there is none beyond that here in the continental United States. It is ne plus ultra. Again, meaning that we outrank anybody else in society. Okay? And I hate to be redundant, but I keep saying this every so often just to plant it into your subconscious as to who you are. And not just a bunch of individuals or Negroes with a story on the street corner philosophizing, talking about, you know, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other, but actually being able to establish justice in any of these courts, in any said national and international civic arena, in any forum.